Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our California Hydrogen Policy Series. My name is Ben Zong, and I'm the Online Communications Manager with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Today's webinar is going to cover the contents of the Fuel Cell Electric Truck Vision document that was recently published last week. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar will be recorded. The recording as well as the presentation slides will be sent out as an email once the documents are posted. During the webinar, everyone will be muted. However, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And so please use the GoToWebinar questions feature to ask any questions. Also, during the webinar, our panelists may have their cameras turned on. And so you can either change the size of the webinar by using the slider, or you can disable it altogether using the camera settings. At the California Fuel Cell Partnership, we are a collaboration of over 50 industry and government organizations. Our main role is to bring organizations together to work on expanding the market for hydrogen and fuel cell technology and to create a cleaner future. I want to welcome our two newest members, Biotech and Faricia. If your organization is interested in joining the Fuel Cell Partnership, please contact myself or Keith Malone, and we can discuss how we can partner together to move fuel cell technology forward. Joining me today will be Nico Bokamp with the California Fuel Cell Partnership and James Cass with Toyota as our primary presenters. At the end, when we have our Q&A, we'll have our panelists joining us as well, Dave Edwards and Jordan Truitt with Air Liquide, Jiv Axon and Micah Shuba with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, Tom Mamuris with Shell, and Lisa Marisola with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And so with that, I'm going to hand off to James. James?
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Just make sure you can hear me okay before we get started.
Yes, we can.
All right, see nodding from Nico. So as Ben noted, my name's James Cast. I'm supporting Toyota in a business development role for many things heavy duty, but also still supporting light duty infrastructure as well. And really served as a key task force chair here along with Nico to facilitate a lot of the document. And so today, really what we want to do, now that it has been published, is bring forward some of the key graphics, takeaways, and messages to a much broader audience, just to get a sense for the intent of the document and how really we intend to go to the next steps to push fuel cell vehicle technology, especially in the heavy duty sector for Class 8 on road. So you will note before we go too much further here that this is indeed a vision document and not anything beyond that. It's getting closer to something like a roadmap or more of a strategic plan, but that is more of a next step. It was really intended to really generate many questions and not provide the answers to everything, but help get the industry, public policy, academia, investors all starting to think on the same page for the role that fuel cell technology can play in meeting the goals of zero emission freight and of course overall carbon neutrality. So I just wanted to highlight at a high level here what we're talking about today and how we can move into next steps focused mostly on Q&A. We'll try to keep the presentation side of this fairly brief. Nico, anything else you'd like to add before we jump into the next couple slides?
No, you took my emphasis on vision, so there we go. You've nailed it.
Got the vision honed in. So let's go ahead and hit the next slide here, please. All right, so as you've probably seen in many of the press releases, there's again a key focus on key numbers that come out of this document. And really the intent here is to align with a lot of the goals that first, of course, go to 2030, 2035, and eventually to 2045, whether that's set by CARB, CEC, or executive orders in the state of California. But you'll see here, it's really looking at 70,000 trucks, and these are Class 8 on-road trucks. So that would be short haul drayage, mid and long regional haul, and also line haul is kind of the key scoping items we're talking about, being supported now by 200 stations all within the state and expanding to other states, as you'll see in a moment, to actually enable this kind of penetration all by 2035. And to just get a bit more semblance here, the background where the numbers come from, it's really looking at a success-oriented version of meeting the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and also the currently developing Advanced Clean Fleet rules in the state, along with actually achieving 100% drayage by 2035. So if you assume all of those happen in conjunction and a very high percentage of those go fuel cell electric trucks, this is kind of the numbers that we see with the demand requiring something like 200 stations in that ballpark to support that kind of rollout. Let's go to the next slide. So the key here, of course, is that is quite an acceleration, right? We're going right now from nothing that's commercially available today from a fuel cell electric trucks, but how you bring that to really market initially in 2025 that you note here, and eventually getting to a 2035 type of vision to achieve that 70,000 trucks and 200 station roadmap. So here, really the key was to get some sense of how this will grow organically and how we can, as an industry, look to start and jumpstart the market in just the next couple of years. So if you focus on the blue circles first, you'll note all of them are still in the state. They're in California. And there's most of the concentration of those stations is in those port areas, given the key needs of drayage, especially in SoCal and in the NorCal ports. But from there, it does need to continue to expand. We know that not all these trucks are used just in quick multi and short mode type operations, but you need to be able to unlock these regions as well. So you can see starting to expand up these key corridors that are both freeways and major highways of freight to enable the kind of these initial markets in the next 5 years or so. As we transition into 2035, you start to need to unlock much higher penetrations of vehicles, which means more use cases of the vehicles. So instead of just interstate within California, really being able to go up the coast and starting to go inland towards the East Coast will be key to actually reach higher levels of penetration of these trucks. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have that many in California itself. So many of these are still key hubs, but we started to map it similar to really the truck stop vision that we see already, where they already are supporting diesel trucks on the road. So as long as you have these stations somewhat co-assembled with these truck stops with less than 300, 250 miles apart, you could enable this entire kind of west coast regional delivery of vehicles, starting in the local areas, moving to regional, and eventually unlocking some of this west coast long haul. So a lot baked into this slide. I'm sure a lot of questions will come here, but maybe we'll kind of pause that for a moment, and I'll see Nico again if you want to add any key topics to this slide.
Yeah, maybe a little bit on context on the geography of California as well as timeline-wise. So James already mentioned that the focus is on California, but with freight in mind, a point to make here as well is that we've been clearly told by the trucking industry that Class 8 trucks are not confined to the state. If they are to be used in a one-to-one replacement mode, then we can expect, and everyone should expect that these vehicles, as James already alluded to, will not stay in the state, but need to be able to go out of the state to be able to move the freight like they usually do and get the freight to the customers that it's going to, or where it's coming from for that matter. So that's also, I think James already touched on that. The Central Valley is an example. Agricultural goods mostly come out of that region and go to the ports or throughout or go elsewhere in the U.S., whereas the ports largely function as import and some export, obviously, as well, because the Central Valley products also go outside of the U.S. The other point that I want to also add to this as well is so 2025 is an interim milestone, whereas 2035 is also really a milestone towards a 2045 larger and longer term goal of full zero emission freight movement. So this again, the 2035 is also an interim vision. Even though we present it as a vision, it is also an interim vision towards 2045. So that's a point I want to add to it, but I think you covered it all well, and just want to add that for context.
No, appreciate that. And actually, as you're saying that, I'm going to go again back to the vision perspective of this here, because again, I think a lot of folks may look at this map and say, oh, why not a dot here and why a dot here? And certainly this is not intended to be explicit and prescriptive. We're not saying you have to have a station here or 5 stations in this exact area, but it does give at least, again, a general sense and a guide to the overall industry here for how this could really grow organically. And of course, we start to go through further road mapping, strategic plans and such. That's when we really start to align more clearly on how this evolves over time. But this is indeed more of a kind of a stenciled look as opposed to a we must do this by these dates type of a plan. I think we can go ahead to the next slide.
The one point to add to that for context on how diesel operates nowadays, it's like there are approximately 500 public diesel fueling stations for trucking in the state, give or take a little bit. So that gives you a sense that this 200 is a significant step in the direction of full zero emission freight movement. So to add that to James' comments, and that with regard to the interstates and highways that are shown here, these are clearly not all the highways or all the most of the interstates are there, but not all the highways. There are more roads, but these are roads that have significant throughput, as you can see on the trucks per day throughput. That is known, and so there are more roads. This is not the only, but for vision purposes, this is sufficient to get the point across of how freight is moved by truck throughout the Western US and California.
Yep, very good. Thanks, Ben. So one other key graphic we wanted to highlight here, I know the document indeed is quite focused on heavy duty, and also a lot of this moves down to medium duty as well. But a key motif throughout is that the two, both light duty fuel cell electric vehicles and heavy duty fuel cell electric vehicles, do have a lot of synergy amongst them. And so it's really a way to not only grow from the momentum that light duty has by moving into heavy duty, but growing heavy duty will also continue to filter down into supporting light duty as well. And the key pieces here are really the modularity of the two. So of course, as you grow the infrastructure side for the fuel, the scale of that is just so much larger for trucks, using many more times the fuel per day, and also in certain areas. And that scale can be leveraged for light duty to help bring down the cost and also increase the overall robustness of the supply chain itself, which of course we desperately need on the light duty space. But there's still a strategy for many OEMs on the light duty side that are leveraging 20 plus years of development for those light duty vehicles and bringing them into those heavy duty trucks. So that could be the component of the fuel cell stack, it could be the hydrogen storage itself, and many other components that can be shared or again leveraged from to help accelerate the development for heavy duty trucks, but also again help reduce the cost based on economies of scale. So that's kind of the key light duty, heavy duty synergy that we're pointing out here. But of course, there's others as well, which could include direct co-location of stations. You think of existing truck stops today, you don't just have diesel fueling, that's in one area, but at a similar site, but in a different location, you have fueling for cars. And you could see a similar business model working for fueling hydrogen vehicles, both light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty, and something that would definitely be considered going forward as we're building out a network for both light duty and heavy duty synergistically. Those, I think, the key points I wanted to highlight here. Nico, any other key ones you'd like to bring to the table?
Yeah, maybe to broaden it even more, but we're mostly talking about on-road so far, but this goes even broader on the light-duty side of things. You could also consider material handling as an influence on this perspective as well, whether it be on the fuel cell component cost reduction side of things and the development of the supply chain and competition there, as well as on the fuel production and fuel use side of things. It all relates to each other, as James already alluded to. So that also plays a role in here. We didn't emphasize it as much, but it's part of this concept as well, and how things relate and how they have an impact on cost reduction overall and the success of the technology.
That's right. Yep. Let's go to the next slide, Ben. Thank you. So this is kind of more of a summary of some of the key points that you probably saw with reading through the document itself. So I'll just kind of walk through again why these were the key points and a bit of what we're trying to bring the message across. And of course, the first, and this goes to many different audiences, is just the essentialness of fuel cell electric trucks to meet the needs of going full zero emission on road. We know there's many different operators with all kinds of different needs in all types of use cases, specifically for Class 8, but the role that especially fuel cell can play in Class 8, I think is going to be very, very key. And noting that to get it up to speed, help accelerate, get it to the market quickly, really needs that support now. And that's really how it segues into the second bullet, where it's really a broad level of support. It's both public side from policies that enable it, incentives, tax incentives, and what have you, but it's also private investment and growth as well. And that could be in the forms of partnerships, direct investment in the technology for both the vehicles and the infrastructure as well. But if we aren't starting any of this basically right now or in the very near future, we're going to be delaying those timelines of those goals and those targets coming to later parts of the decade, and then again 2035, 2045. A lot of that momentum determines on what we do very, very soon. So those are kind of the key first metrics there for both the public and private side. But as you go there, again, how we actually do this with policies, they need to, again, be quite predictable and long-term. So we're not just looking at, every year there will be changes in that policy, because as you have more uncertainty, it's harder to make a longer-term investment from both the truck side or the infrastructure side. So how we, as a broader group in industry supporting hydrogen. How do we look at policies that can do this, that can enable the market, and that send the market signals to say, we know we need this technology and it's going to be around for decades to come. So again, the document isn't intended to list off all the policies that we must have. That really is just to note a suite of options we have. And again, as we further have conversations with a broad group of stakeholders, how indeed we create those right policy mechanisms that either exist today and expand them, or could perhaps brand new policy mechanisms that we haven't yet thought of to help enable this and get them into the hands of operators at the end of the day. The last other point is that the policy too is not just focused on one area of the supply chain. We've known very clearly that for trucks to be on the road, you need fuel, and to build fueling stations, you need to have trucks to back it up and have that demand. So it's everything that enables the vehicles, the fueling infrastructure itself, and then the production and the supply chain based on renewable hydrogen supply chain as well. Anything you'd like to add on that one, Nico?
Just maybe a minor point on all of this is that we are talking about fuel cell electric trucks here, but it's obviously we're talking about part of the heavy duty solution. There is also a place for battery electric trucks in this space. They fill a different niche or a market in this regard, and but there are at the same time there are many similarities between the two platforms or the two solutions. Whereas one relies on the storage on board, or it has the energy on board, and it taps directly into that, and a fuel cell mostly generates the power on board. So there are some differences, but that also translates itself into usability and the one-to-one replacement preference that all the fleet operators basically have, whether they will take that path or not. So our organization covers both, and all of our members that work on the electric drivetrain solutions have interest in both and invest in both, and it goes back and forth with regards to development and also with regards to cost reduction, and also as a result the long-term solution is going to be more successful if both are used and rolled out. But obviously in this document focus on fuel cell electric trucks as the solution, the essential part of the solution for 100% zero emission freight movement.
No, indeed. Thanks for flagging that. I probably should have done it at the beginning to note we're not trying to ignore it's a portfolio of options, but indeed very dedicated to how to proliferate this particular technology, and that's the focus of this document indeed. Let's go to the next one here, Ben, which I think is, really just a pull quote to really kind of summarize a couple of those key bullets there. So I'm not going to read this aloud, but essentially it's saying that to enable 100%, you do need the portfolio of options. So I guess you kind of segue perfectly into this, Nico, where you've got to have fuel cell electric trucks to get to 100%. There's just enough needs, there's enough differences, and obviously you see this in many different use cases as well, but specifically as well for Class 8 and the medium heavy duty space, growing the market will be key to achieve these kind of goals. I think we don't have a whole lot of slides left here. Yep, so we've got some other resources. I'm not sure, Ben, do you want to run through some of these, or Keith, if you're on, if you'd like to run through some of these in more detail?
Yeah, just really quickly. Again, our vision documents can be posted on our website at cafcp.org/truckvision. And you can also find that in our resources database at cafcp.org/resources. On the main navigation, resources is also on there as well. And so you'll be able to find it on there. We also have a blog for the news release. And so that's in our blog section. And then also please check out the events page. As usual, if you have any events or news that we don't have listed on there that you think pertains to our audience, please let us know and we'll add it to that database. Moving on.
To add to this, Ben, there are also social media outlets that we've used for this document. And so if you're on one of those social media platforms, you can find this document as well, be it Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, I think as it as well. So they are part of this overview of what resources are available. They're a little less prominent in the sense of that these the ones that are mentioned here as resources are the main resources, where those other platforms will refer back to this or have portions of the full resource.
Thanks, Nico. And then also before we get to the Q&A session, we did get some questions that came in prior to the webinar. And there were a number of questions about light duty vehicles and light duty vehicle stations. And I just wanted to point out again that this webinar is really focused around the truck vision document. And so we'll try to get to some of those questions if time permits. But I do want to point out that the resources database has a list of hydrogen stations for light duty vehicles where stations that are in development are listed. And so please do check out our resources database for that as well. And so moving on to our Q&A. Again, if we aren't able to get to all of your questions today and you have additional questions, please contact us at info@cafcp.org and again, address that to Nico Bocamp, and we'll try to address those time permitting. So the first couple of questions that came in, what's the plan to fill the trucks for long routes, for example, from West Coast to East Coast? And also, how do you see this as an opportunity for private investors as a business model?
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump in, especially on the first point. You may have seen, if you read the document, there was a note of the value of a national vision and strategy as well. So of course, this was very focused on California, and we noted how important it is to expand beyond the borders to enable this. But honestly, to really get to 100%, you do have to have this national roadmap and national network to really get to 100% Class 8, especially for those line haul applications. So we would definitely expect that anything going forward would require really clear connection with federal agencies that would be looking to create and learn about how we really do this from a national level. The second one, I think you asked about private investment, which I know, again, there's a lot of different ways this can be done, obviously, depending on what role you are. But there's companies themselves that are partnering up and starting to invest directly in the technology. I know there's also a number of different opportunities, even in the startup community. You know, there's a lot of newer technologies, newer companies starting to get into hydrogen. And I think it's really just keeping a keen eye on where this is moving, what really could move the needle, because there is just globally so much momentum going into hydrogen right now, whether that's the Hydrogen Council and all those large companies that are pushing this forward, whether it's policies that are greatly incentivizing not just one technology, but including hydrogen as well to be part of these carbon neutral strategies. So it's clearly a lot of opportunity out there for any kind of private and public investment.
To add to that as well is that clearly this is a Western US focused document, but we've already had, based on this document, our initial conversations about interest in expanding this to New Mexico, and that's more on the southern route, let's say, to the East Coast, and also to Texas. So there is a targeted result of this is that this triggers a larger conversations on a higher level and a broader national level. So that's the intent of the document as well, to start this conversation and get to road mapping on beyond visioning only, and get to the practical side of things on how do we do this and where do we start. Obviously, there is already activity going on in the Port of LA, and soon to be followed by activities in the Port of Oakland. But the broader discussion needs to happen on how to connect those, how to expand those, how to go beyond California, how to get to the southern part of the U.S., how to get to the freight centers throughout the U.S., and how to get to the East Coast eventually, or start on the East Coast and work our way this way. But that's not been part on how do we do that exactly. These are initial conversations, and that's what this document was meant to do, to at least have our ducks in a row on what's envisioned, and get a sense of what industry's interest is in this and how to get this going. And we think this is a start, but it's really also only a start. So add that to the answer that you just gave to in response to the question that Ben shared with us.
And again, for the other panelists that have logged on, you're welcome to jump in anytime to answer as well.
And to add to the panelists that are joining, those are the folks that have helped us to write the document. And they were the main writers team of the document, so they have as much insight, if not more, in certain aspects of this document and answering questions. So we thank them also for their help with this, and very much appreciate it. It's been almost a year that we've worked on this, and we're glad that we have the result as it is, and are able to share this with all of you on the phone and on the webinar.
An impressive team effort indeed. Yep.
Next question is about the LCFS HRI. Any thoughts on HRI LCFS credits for heavy duty refilling stations? Will these credits dry up pretty soon? And considering the fact that these credits are also used for fast charging battery electric vehicles, what's your thoughts?
No, it's actually already something where there's movement ongoing today. So it's obviously we've seen that as a key enabler for light duty, and it very well could be for heavy duty as well. So there's already, I think, some different thoughts on how to propose ways to expand this to heavy duty in some way, shape, or form. Those haven't taken a concrete shape yet, but that is very much on the radar and something we even noted specifically in this document as potentially a key enabler for the infrastructure side.
What federal, state, and county incentives exist to help heavy duty truck fleets offset the high purchase cost of fuel cell electric trucks?
Did you say incentives?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. So at a high level, there are many different programs, especially in California, many of them facilitated by the different state agencies and local air quality districts. Namely, there's the HFIT program, which is a few $100,000s for both fuel cell and battery electric trucks, especially Class 8. You have kind of the repower and replace programs, whether it's Carl Moore or others that you can apply to as well. There's now thinking of tax incentives, both in the state, multiple other states, and also from the federal level, thinking of basically bringing the tax parity down to if you were to purchase a diesel truck as another ongoing movement. There's probably a number of others that I could keep rattling off, but generally I'll just note there's a lot of resources for the trucks that are out there. Still more needed, but there's a number of them out there. On the station side, again, we've seen the LCFS just generally, so fuel sales would already occur today, but it's the HRI pathway, which would be new. And of course, a number of grant programs, especially for pilot projects and demonstrations, which have already occurred, supporting already the first 5 or so heavy duty stations in California, and that will of course continue to grow. So I'll shut up now and let Lisa chime in because she's brought herself up here for helping address some of this.
Good afternoon. Yes, we're in South Coast AQMD. We're very excited to be participating with state and federal co-funding agencies and a lot of private investment in the early demonstration programs through our Clean Fuels program. And we're also seeing increased interest in some of our incentive funds through the Mobile Source Air Pollution Reduction Review Committee. Clean transportation funding is what they go by, as well as increased applications to our Carl Moyer program, which is through the state, but we administer it in our region. So there are a number of incentives that have been established, and we're looking for creative new ways to support the growth of the industry as well. So thanks a lot for all your efforts in putting this work together.
Yeah, and to add to Lisa's point, because that covers the South Coast, there are obviously other air districts as well, and I think that's what the question was about as well. And then there's also an increasing initiative on the other coastal states as well, in Washington and Oregon, for example, on the coast. So there is more coming, but if you have an interest, please bring it up with your legislators or regulators that's of interest, and that's much needed both on the fuel cell electric truck Class 8 side of things as well as on the battery electric Class 8 side of things. And one note to make for HFIP, it opened up I think 2 days ago, and it was subscribed within the first, they ran out of funds within the first 30 minutes or so of the funds becoming available and ability to subscribe for those. So that's there's much more needed because that's just the early side of the market, whereas if this moves forward, there's a lot more needed to make it palatable and workable for the fleet operators that are expected to operate these trucks.
Thank you all. And again, for attendees, if you have any questions, please use the questions feature, and we'll get those asked. Next question that's come in. Will I and other hydrogen fuel cell car owners be able to fill up at these hydrogen truck stations? We need that. Will hydrogen trucks have 700 bar tanks as a standard? And will hydrogen car and truck markets be competing with other fuel from providers?
All good questions. And I think as I noted earlier, right, there's definitely some synergy to doing so. If you're building out heavy duty infrastructure, it is a location that could benefit from light duty infrastructure. It seems something that of course would be up to each developer, but certainly we would push for that kind of co-development in a lot of those key areas. Right now, I think the jury's still out on exactly what will be stored on board the truck. We know that the cars are all 700 bar, a number of OEMs going 700 bar for sure on heavy duty, but there could be lower pressures. There's even some other unique ideas ongoing. So again, I think there's a lot of open development for heavy duty, but the intent is still similar to light duty, where interoperability is key. So any vehicle OEM that has a truck will be able to interface and fuel at any infrastructure provider, rather than having kind of proprietary, unique versions of fueling vehicles, so that all investments can benefit all drivers that are on the road for both the heavy duty and the light duty space.
Yeah, at the moment, with regards to heavy duty vehicles fueling light duty vehicles, that's a no, because there are different fueling protocols applied, and from a safety perspective and integrity of the system, it's not a wise move to try to fill a light duty vehicle at a heavy duty vehicle. So at this moment, heavy duty vehicles are not open for light duty vehicles unless they're co-located, as James is referring to. But for the trucks altogether, there will be interoperability between the trucks. So any truck manufacturer should be able to bring up their vehicle to a truck station and fill up their truck. Whereas a light duty vehicle, it's expected that that will not be possible to make even that connection, but it's also not a wise move to even try so, because it affects the integrity of the vehicle. So please, at this moment, do not try that or tamper with it to make it happen, because we hope that doesn't result in a situation where you severely regret that.
Yeah, the focus on safety is there, both the fueling protocol, but even co-location. So right now you don't pull up to your neighborhood gas station and see a bunch of trucks fueling there, and that's for a good reason. And that would be the same case for any hydrogen fueling, because really, again, the flow and the traffic flow would be very similar. So you would pull up with the car at a truck stop, on the heavy duty side, and a truck wouldn't pull up to a light duty station on the corner, and that would be the same style as well.
Next question, how much hydrogen will be needed to support the 70,000 trucks and the 200 stations?
It's a lot of hydrogen. I'm trying to think back. We basically took kind of an average of all the different types of trucks. So again, the number of drayage that we would expect, kind of the regional haul and long haul trucks. If you generally kind of average those out, we get the demand, which eventually got us to the 200 stations. And just so for everybody's awareness, we assumed by 2035, that average station capacity of about 8 tons per day. So you do some really quick math, you're looking at 1,600 tons per day of hydrogen, is again, kind of the rough ballpark based on a number of different fuel economy assumptions and usage, of course, for what that type of scale may require from a hydrogen perspective.
It reminds me as well, I don't think we completely addressed an earlier question about how the use of hydrogen will affect light duty market availability of fuel. The assumption, I think, with a lot of what we're envisioning is that there will be new capacity, and that will really be on the 2035 timeline. Although we do have a 2025 interim milestone here in the mapping of the document that was of the map that we presented earlier. But the assumption is that will be pretty much all new capacity. So there is no, we are assuming and working towards that not affecting the light duty market, but it will be in addition to, and it will be shared production facilities and distribution facility equipment. But the assumption here is that will not directly affect each other. It's more like thinking about it as in the current gasoline market, how some trucks, smaller trucks, not the heavy duty trucks mostly, use gasoline, and that doesn't necessarily affect light duty vehicles. So that's a at scale situation compared to where we are today, which is small scale, and where priorities are made by providers and distributors of hydrogen as a fuel.
Thanks. Our next question, we had a couple questions about the colors of hydrogen, and so I'm going to kind of frame it together. Is green hydrogen necessary in California for trucks, or is blue hydrogen can also be used? And then also, can you please discuss the use of turquoise hydrogen, methane pyrolysis, produced at either centrally located or the place of truck fueling?
The colors of hydrogen, it's always an interesting topic, right? And if we really frame this in the context of achieving carbon neutrality, we know that regardless of the pathway, and there are many, whether it's electrolytic from 100% renewable or other types of electricity, or if it's the green and blue pathways, so you're either sequestering the hydrogen or sequestering the CO2, sorry, to reduce that carbon footprint, or if you're using a biogas pathway to avoid sometimes very significant emissions. I think we're going to need obviously all of them in some way, but at the end, especially in that 2035 timing, the assumption here is that it aligns with the Hydrogen Council goals, that would be a 100% renewable type of feedstock within the next 15 years or so. And the Hydrogen Council goal is even globally in 2030, where a very large majority of that hydrogen is 100% renewable and decarbonized hydrogen. So I would say it's obviously a future necessity for sure. What we're doing today and how we get there obviously is some time that's required to get to those different production pathways. But we would see that you have to get there eventually to really achieve the carbon neutrality goals.
Yeah, and considering there was a specific technology-specific question asked about the production of hydrogen, I think you addressed it, but any and all renewable sources for hydrogen can be used. Considering James' earlier answer about amount of hydrogen this takes to provide fuel through these 200 stations or 300 station locations, that is much needed. So to get to 100% renewable, you need to get any and all resources to be used, renewable resource to be used to make that hydrogen. So yes and yes to that question of does that issue be considered as well?
Yeah.
Thanks. And I think also part of that question, there was a question about where the hydrogen is produced as far. And so I think this question here helps elaborate that. Is there a way to provide hydrogen production at the filling station at reasonable cost, given the high cost of electricity?
Again, I think you're going to see both. You're going to see large centralized, depending on the technology and the business strategy, and you're also going to see on-site. Again, I don't think there's one right answer. Just like everything with hydrogen and generally going zero emission, you need the portfolio of all the options. So all the colors of the hydrogen rainbow and all the distributed versus centralized, it's all going to depend on the local business case. And sometimes it'll dictate one versus the other, and they will all provide benefit and redundancy to the supply chain.
Thanks. Next, we had a comment that came in. Hyundai has a Class 8 hydrogen fuel cell truck in production and for sale. They have sold 1,600 of them to Switzerland, and the CC and ARB has just approved for funding of 30 bus dredge trucks for tests at the Port of Oakland. So thanks for that, Chris.
Yep.
Next
Indeed,
question.
Things are moving. Go ahead.
Next question is, I believe this is specifically for Gia. Please ask the California governor person this question. I recently bought a 2021 Mirai. When is California going to fund the $4,500 rebate for hydrogen cars? Gia, are you on the line?
I am just getting. Hi there. When is California going to do the $4,500 rebate for cars? I don't have a good answer for you on that. We do have budget in the governor's recent budget for more than $500 million for the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project. And that's going to be kind of released. It's a one-time amount that's being released. And so I don't have an exact date for you, but I think it's a solid move in being able to access those funds again before too long.
Yeah, and to add to that, actually, is that it's important as well for in this case that we're talking here about trucks. So the $4,500, yes, is important for cars, but for trucks, those amounts initially, especially as you look at HVIP, need to be much more significant than $4,500 per vehicle. So that may have a zero or doubling and a zero added to it as well. So there's the numbers for trucks have to be more significant than $4,500, because then the people will laugh you out of the room basically if you propose that to a truck operator.
Yeah, Nico, thanks for mentioning that. I think maybe I'll just take the opportunity to say one more thing about the budget. For those that aren't aware, it's not just about trucks, but there was a nearly $4 billion budget that was passed, the governor's budget that was passed by the legislature over the next 3 years. And within that, there's a number of things, one of which is a target for 1,000 trucks, funding for 1,000 trucks and supporting infrastructure as well. So in the context of this, I think that's relevant.
Yep, maps quite well to that 2025 year. Get some stations and some trucks on the road.
Yeah.
Thanks. Next question, would repowering existing trucks to fuel cell electric trucks help make the development faster?
Good question. Generally, as we've seen the current status of this technology, it's not a simple process to do that, right? You have all the OEMs partnering with other powertrain providers to do this in-house. So right now, it's not like you would just go buy a fuel cell stack, buy a truck, and do that yourself. That would typically be a pretty difficult thing to do. But in the future, you never know. But I would say right now, as we're still developing the technology, just note that's maybe not as quite as straightforward as you may assume that it could be.
Next question, drayage is in state. Wouldn't it be easier to set up in-state drayage first? And actually, two questions from the same person. The second is, does California have any kind of contingent agreements from industry to use the stations if they are set up?
So I think the intent is indeed to focus on drayage first, or at least those key freight hubs, which is why you see 3 stations now that it went into the Southern California region, 2 actually literally right in the port. And now the announcement from Hyundai, which was referenced, going into the NorCal port operations as well. So the idea is indeed not to make a full, statewide or West Coast wide network first, but to start in those key hubs. And I think mostly the intent here is that any stations built, as long as it made sense, would be publicly accessible to any trucks that are on the road, unless there was, a dedicated station for one particular fleet. We know that there's a lot of behind the fence stations, but I think many, if not all of them that are being developed now, if not initially, soon after kind of their data collection programs, will all be open to any other trucks that are driving around in the area, so that any fuel cell truck would have access to, the early term fueling that could be built out initially.
And to add to that, for access to those stations, Shell is the entity to contact. They've indicated that anyone wants access to those stations with their trucks, please contact Shell, and we can discuss and make sure that safety and integrity of the systems is sufficient to use the trucks for fueling at those stations. I think that Tom Mormoras may not have joined us today. I think he may be out on leave for this week. So unless he joined us and I was not aware of it, but he would be a good person to reach out to start that conversation.
Yep, particular requests we can definitely route through. I know there's the partnership email. There's definitely ways to get connected to the right folks to enable that.
Sorry, just looking through the questions. Quite a few questions that have come in. Again, thank you all for submitting these.
Good.
Other truck companies like Nikola and Hyzon seem to be planning to develop their own hydrogen refilling stations. Wouldn't this approach create a balkanized refilling infrastructure?
Sorry, I missed the second half of the question. If you could repeat, Ben.
Wouldn't this approach create a balkanized refilling infrastructure?
Well, again, the idea here is to engage all the industry key players so that all of the investments from any companies are accessible by any of the others. So at least as far as I'm aware, nobody's trying to make their own dedicated network. I would hope that's the case, and why we're already kicking off a number of standards discussions, both at ISO and at SAE, for any existing kind of interim and also future long-term filling protocols and hardware to enable all of the trucks to fill at all the stations. So at least that's the current perspective that I have, unless anybody else on the panel has a different understanding.
Yeah, I think to add to that, like any and all of these truck manufacturers mentioned, would love to see the use of their stations, because it translates into throughput for the station, which helps out with the return on investment. So that's in addition to what James mentioned about interoperability and things being consistent between those stations for the use of everyone where possible, because it's really important and helpful for all of them to be able to continue to move forward if they don't have to deal with a lot of sunk cost or equipment that's unused or used to a lesser extent than it could be. So I suspect that, and I think I've heard this as well, is that any and everyone that would like to use those stations is very welcome to do so after initial conversation and getting on the same page in regards to the use of those stations.
Yep. Thanks, Nico.
Thanks. Our next question, this might be for Keith Malone. Hopefully Keith's on the call, but others are welcome to chime in as well. The New York Times just published an article today creating doubt about hydrogen as a solution to future greenhouse gas reductions. What is your organization doing to rebut these types of articles and to educate the public about the benefits of hydrogen?
Wow, that's a big lift. Look, I saw that article. It kind of felt like they were focused solely on hydrogen from natural gas. They did include, quotes from Jack Brower out of UC Irvine, who is really a key advocate for the development of renewable hydrogen and hydrogen as energy storage. We continue to do our education with policymakers and others. And, this is often an attack on fuel cell electric vehicles in general, this sort of repetitive hydrogen is made from natural gas. And oftentimes I find people don't know how to use the word and. The word and is always missing from that because we also need to tell them, and we know that it's being put on a renewable pathway or renewable and zero carbon pathway here and around the globe. And we also know there are a lot of green hydrogen projects that are, if not coming online, are planned. Wood Mackenzie had some really great data over the last year about the number of projects, and it's huge. Comparing installed capacity to planned capacity, it was like 31 times the installed capacity, the number of projects that have been announced that are coming up in the next couple of years. It's always frustrating to see those kinds of articles. They're going to come out. They're just going to come out. They're part of kind of the background noise. The only thing we can do is just continue to talk to policymakers, to talk to the public, and let them know that if you can hear the frustration in my voice, it is, because a lot of times these stories get it wrong. But that said, the story came out, and we're just going to continue to educate and educate and educate and try and talk to these reporters, these writers, and these papers and get them to understand what's happening. It's probably not the best response in the world, but that's my immediate response.
I'm convinced, Keith.
And it's also in the context of what we're talking about here, about visioning things. Yes, there will be pains and growing pains to work towards where this needs to be. We see growing pains left and right for all the zero emission vehicle options, whether it be especially in the heavy duty truck side of things, which is what we're all focused on here. And that area needs a lot of help, and there is really no infrastructure to speak of for heavy duty trucks, whether it be battery electric or fuel cell electric for fueling. So there will be a lot more to come and work to be done. Obviously, this is a bit of a line in the sand, this vision document, that's different than the article that was brought up, where that this really describes the current struggles on moving forward. But that's a clear indication that a lot of work needs to be done, and that there will be challenges, but hopefully there will be lessons learned from that. And I think that's also what Keith is referring to as this is part of growing up. There will be pushback, there will be opinions, there will be use and misuse of information, but that's just part of the game, so to say. So we are looking forward to rolling this out and making it a competitive market, and that's really what's ahead of us, including making these vehicles making these fuels motor vehicle fuels, and that's not really been happening on all around for all the ZEF fuels. It's a process that's still ongoing. There's a lot of work to be done that was not even emphasized in this specific article that was brought up. Keith, you want to add anything to that because you were raising your finger on a point that may have been missed? Go ahead.
Another use of the word and we know there are 30 national strategies out there. There are several more in development, and we all know what the end game is. renewable and zero carbon hydrogen. There's not a lot of disagreement on that globally. It's a matter of the real battle is how and when. How fast?
How fast, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like with the trucks. We need the investment now. We need the predictable long-term policies that incentivize investment, not only in the truck pathway, not only in the infrastructure, but in the production of hydrogen. And if you don't send the right policy signals, you're going to get what you're going to get as a result. So I will also add, a lot of groups have been really good at saying no to hydrogen, and they don't know how to say yes to green hydrogen. I think that's also what this New York Times story reflects. And it's getting really tiring, got to be honest.
LA Times story, right?
LA Times story, the New York Times story.
Okay, all the stories. Okay,
all of them. So, but I don't even want to talk about the LA Times story. That was lazy.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next question then.
Thanks, Keith.
Just to note that again, that was Keith Malone with the Fuel Cell Partnership. Speakers, when you speak, please note your affiliation. We have a request from the audience. So next question is around next steps. What are the next steps for the California Fuel Cell Partnership to follow up on the heavy-duty station development and policies to advance such development? Also, again, there's a few questions around next steps, and so I'm just going to put them together. Okay. What are plans being made to expand expand the needed stakeholders in California and across the West, and to achieve this vision document as well as the roadmap? And then last one is, can you talk about the breadth of feedback from the members, the OEMs, the infrastructure providers, government on this particular document?
No, that's actually the perfect segue. I was thinking we discussed next steps anyway, so sounds like a lot of people are thinking that direction, which is perfect. So I guess the first thing I'll say, the feedback of the document has really been exactly what we wanted, which is what's next. In a weird way, there's a lot of effort went into the document, and I think we're all acknowledging that it's there and it's needed, but immediately it said, I got more questions. What do we do? How do we action this? And again, that was really the intent and the purpose here, to engage not just the stakeholders also that we're aware of and that we know, but even others that are coming through with a lot of interest to move forward to the next step. So I guess I'm kind of going backwards in your questions, but that's really been the key piece of feedback that we've received so far to move into the next phase. So as far as next phases go, the first, of course, starts with something like this webinar and this workshop. We're really just trying to engage with as many different folks that have interest, have questions. We know this is only an hour, but I think it really creates the feedback loop to reach out to the partnership, to ask any questions you have, note anything you'd like to help with direction, and your kind of role that you'd like to play in a road mapping type of an exercise. That is the word we keep hearing, strategic plan, roadmap, whatever we want to call it. But I think definitely putting some more meat on the bones for how to action this, both from an industry and a policy side of things, is really going to be key. I will say what is not known yet is who really takes the lead role in this. I think a lot of people assume it will be the partnership, and that may very well be, but that's still, I think, to be discussed further as well. There may be other groups or other organizations that have a very strong desire to take at least a co-lead role in some sense to really move some of this forward. The last thing before I maybe pass to Nico as well, I'm sure I'll miss a couple of thoughts, is the timing aspect of this. So we don't want to wait too long, but we do want to make sure we engage with enough folks here in the next, call it, month or so. There's a few different events, like the Green Transportation Summit and Expo up in Tacoma. There's the ACT Expo down in Long Beach. And of course, I know a lot of individual outreach I think we'll have with the number of stakeholders. And so call it the late September, October timeframe here, looking for more of the action plan to create an action plan is maybe the terrible word choice that I'll use for how to start moving this forward and have something more concrete into the early 22 timeframe as much as possible to help inform policy, inform the industry, and start to move this document going forward. So try to summarize quite a bit there. Nico, anything you want to add as far as next steps?
Yeah, just a few additional things as well. And the next steps that you focused on mostly were like road mapping, and I think that's also what the question was about and what we would do. But then what will we do next? There are some, I wouldn't call it low-hanging fruit per se, but say like the earlier challenges that we have to deal with. An example is, for example, the 1,000 zero-emission heavy-duty trucks that different state agencies are focusing on rolling out. I think mostly focused on CARB, Air Resources Board. But then there are also other areas that that really need some focus, like the ports, for example, Port of LA, Long Beach. They have a drayage target. Basically, by 2035, all the drayage trucks are anticipated or regulated to be zero emission. That's a little nearby, and it has to start soon. And we cannot wait until 2035 to roll that out. And that's also partially rolled up in this, but those are kind of like very focused regional efforts. Maybe the 1,000 trucks, not as much as more over California, but hopefully that's also a little bit focused, because that means you can make a shared use of an infrastructure, be it hydrogen fueling or be it battery charging. So in those cases, that's a little bit, that's very, the boundaries are relatively well set, whereas for all of California, that's a really large area. So again, to emphasize James' comment about if there are other stakeholders have an interest in this, please contact us and we can start a discussion on how this can happen sooner than later and how you can get involved.
I'd like to also pass, I know we have a number of other panelists. If you have any things that hasn't been noted yet, respond to any questions or any feedback you want to add here, as we're running short on time.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I do want to alert the attendees that we do have a number of questions that are still outstanding, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them. We're actually going to end our Q&A there and open up for the rest of the panelists to make any final comments before we end the webinar. And so, Lisa, I see you on first.
Yeah, I have a 1 o'clock, so I need to go, but appreciate the webinar. And if you have any questions for South Coast AQMD, I'd be happy to help.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
And hey, it's Jordan with Air Liquide. Just want to thank everybody. There's a lot of hard work that went on for quite a long time for this document, and I'm personally proud of it. But I do think it accomplished its goal and sparking questions, and kind of leading up to the next step. So looking forward to seeing where the future goes with solving this issue in California. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you, Jordan. And then, Gia, are you still in line?
Yes, I'm still here.
Any closing remarks?
No final. So, what was that?
Any closing remarks?
Oh, no, just feel free to reach out on anything that we didn't get to answer, or and thanks everybody for your attention and for joining.
Thank you. And then again, back to Nico and James. Any final comments?
I just wanted to make sure, yeah, we do address all the comments and questions that are outstanding. So Ben, I'm not sure if you kind of have a list which we'll bring to the team and find a way to reach back out. But want to note we will obviously not try to ignore that. We want to have all the feedback and address any comments that we can. So we'll coordinate offline maybe on that, Ben.
Definitely, we'll do. And so with that, again, thank you everyone for attending. This is, again, part of our hydrogen policy series. If you have a particular subject you'd like for us to cover, please contact Keith Malone or myself, or Nico Bokamp at info@csp.org. And again, the webinar recording and the slides will be sent out. An email with a link will be sent out as soon as it's posted. And again, thank you all for attending. And thank you to James and Nico for your presentation.